The source of inspiration for this video is probably not what you'd expect. After uploading my video putting down fan theories about Ahsoka fixing or retconning the sequel trilogy, I got this person's comment grandstanding me for not liking Ahsoka. It reads like this.
So, this is just a hate account about a strong female character that has a really well-built story to fit in with the Skywalkers. Honestly, next time just say, I hate strong women in Star Wars. Because at least I know that is the truth and you're just the person hiding behind a child's collectible, bashing good writers' work. I hope you and everyone else who is a hate critic have a great day and a wonderful life of bitterness.
That comment has woke SJW all over it. I hate comments that act so smug and pretentious. It's reminiscent of the average Ryan Johnson Twitter mob user, who this commenter may or may not be. But this comment did make something randomly pop in my mind. I've always been reserved when it comes to Star Wars characters, and upon thinking about it further, I've realised how much I've always preferred the male characters in stories. In the original 6 movies, Leia, and especially Padme, were very overshadowed by other characters. For example, Anakin and Obi-Wan were the ones I was really compelled by, while Padme did have her moments, but they were undershadowed by Anakin and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and a bunch of other characters. I have been told that Natalie Portman was cast too much because she physically resembled Carrie Fisher believably, which may or may not be an honest criticism of the prequels. Other characters stole the scenes. Like even with the outdated smack talk about the romance in Attack of the Clones, who had more of a presence when prequel haters were talking about that? It was Hayden Christensen, in rants talking about sand and blah 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 blah, all of that outdated crap. Also, Padme was mitigated in Revenge of the Sith. It's understandable, since she's pregnant, and the deleted scene about the rebellion probably would have been a minor improvement with Padme. Maybe that's the biggest problem with Revenge of the Sith, but other subplots more than make up for that. Because that film is fucking amazing. Best out of the lot. With Leia, she is an improvement, but again, I keep thinking about how all the other major characters in the original trilogy were more interesting to me personally. So the question beckons, are female Star Wars characters lacking? To me personally, the answer is yes. As a Star Wars everyman who's experienced more stories than the average fan, I can say firsthand that when it comes to my favourite characters per story, they've always been characters who are male. The Force Unleashed, for example, Starkiller and especially Rahm Kota were my favourites. Tales of the Jedi is another example. Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma were my favourites, etc. The main exception to this would be Knights of the Old Republic, in which my 2 favourites there would be Jolee Bindo and Bastila Shan, the latter of which is female. Knights of the Old Republic was pretty diverse for its time, and the voice actors certainly excelled at bringing the characters to life. Bastila Shan is one of my favourite characters from the Old Republic, like maybe number 3 or 4 on my list if I was forced to make one. Everything about her was compelling. Her personality of being a conflicted, emotional Jedi with a struggle to resist temptations, as well as her romance with the male player character, as well as her sassiness, that stuff makes her extremely compelling as a character. I could go on and on about how I love Bastila Shan as a character and how awesome she is, and she's a major exception to my preferences in general when it comes to Star Wars characters. I suppose another problem that comes to mind is that the worst Star Wars characters in general happen to be female. Rey, Holdo, Rose Tarko, L3, Reva, etc. They all suck, and they're all candidates for the worst Star Wars character. I hate all these characters. What these characters all have in common is that they are extremely woke and politically pandering. Disney tried too hard to force these characters based on their gender, and perhaps race additionally, in the case of Rose and Reva, and it backfired. The only one that kind of had a chance on vague first impressions was Rey, because having a female lead in a Star Wars movie was something different from Anakin and Luke, but as I've discussed, she was an unrealistic Mary Sue who got the Force without training, mostly because J.J. Abrams did not understand the Force. George Lucas has reinforced time and time again that training is a pivotal part of becoming a Jedi, and it's definitely not something you believe in, like your confidence in The Matrix, for example. So Rey flopped as a character. If we're being honest, female characters were always reserved in the Star Wars franchise in particular, and to me personally, male characters proved to be more interesting, and opted to be my favourites instead. Remember, Star Wars in the film series is at least aimed at 12-year-olds. That's the demographic. And being a 12-year-old boy, I would have preferred Luke and Anakin and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon to Leia and Padme. That's natural. Another reason being that since the franchise is called Star Wars, Luke and Anakin made more convincing soldiers and heroes and whatnot. It's just classic archetypes in movies from the time. Films weren't without good female leads, like Sarah Connor for example, but remember that a lot of action heroes were male too. I'm just saying. So in my opinion, I always generally prefer male characters when it comes to Star Wars. They always seem to be the better written and more interesting ones. Plus, in Disney Star Wars, the general reputation of female characters were dragged down by terrible characters nobody liked. Some idiots spun this as people being racist, misogynist, because the worst candidates just happened to be women, even though most of them didn't like the male characters either. It's just that the female characters happen to be the worst. Yeah, this is hard to talk about, because no matter what you say, some moron will accuse you of being a misogynist no matter what. Let's be honest, anyone can like Star Wars, but the movies were kind of set up to appeal to boys more. In our youth, traditionally girls, unless they're tomboys, don't tend to like violence or war in the fiction they consume. Especially, I'd say, back in the 70s and 80s, for example. I'm saying that there was a sort of barrier there that resulted in Star Wars in particular appealing to boys more. Princess Leia was an open invitation for girls, but it wasn't that big of one. Especially since Leia was pretty much the only prominent female Star Wars character. I'm saying this because when I was in primary school, the collective of people who liked Star Wars were mostly boys. I do recall this one girl who might have been into Star Wars too, but I can't confirm it. She hung around with that Lucas kid I mentioned in previous videos during recess and lunchtime. That's what I'm saying. Female Star Wars characters were always only prominently one in each story. That's just how Star Wars traditionally worked. The prominent male characters always outnumbered the female ones, and people were fine with that. Then in the age of political correctness, they tried too hard to have so many female characters and failed to write them effectively. Any girls who liked Star Wars liked it the way it was. They were fine with having female characters in reserve most of the time. They still got their icon in Princess Leia regardless. This is probably a part of why people don't like Disney Star Wars. They're changing too much of how Star Wars traditionally worked, in more ways than just the gender ratio, and it's leading to people being unhappy. People who are female or black or whatever liked the series the way it was. Said people didn't care that there were only 2 women or 2 black guys. It's like when a movie tries to appeal to older audiences and they completely forget the younger demographic who grew up with it. A random example being Transformers. The Michael Bay movies are immature, but they're way too inappropriate for the demographic of traditional Transformers fans, that being kids. You know, speaking of Transformers, that's also a franchise that appealed to boys way more. Transformers started with only male robots, but that was retconned later down the line. The franchise appealed to boys way more. That's just its nature. With the themes of a war between Autobots and Decepticons, and the way the toys are designed, and generally just how it all works. It's probably gender tradition I'm thinking of, but it's how people are traditionally raised. Maybe I'm getting off track, but the point is that female characters are lacking somewhat, but they've always been there, and they're a key part of Star Wars. And Disney is forgetting who likes Star Wars to begin with, and that any girls traditionally didn't care about the lacking representation of them. Because these days, it seems more like appealing to political correctness than Star Wars fans or those who would become fans traditionally. That's my take on the matter. As much as I hate Ahsoka, the idea of having a more prominent female character in Star Wars The Clone Wars was a good one. It's a shame though that the final character was an overrated retconny Mary Sue. That's today's discussion. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain.